Finally, hello everybody. We will make sure this lesson continues on, even though we are 25 minutes late starting it. My apologies. I have Carol and Mike on the computer to handle your chat requests and to help you with any issues that you might have. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. We'll be writing those questions down and we'll answer those towards the end. If anything needs my attention immediately, then Carol will wave to me from the top. So if you see me kind of looking up like this, I'm usually looking at Carol for some kind of support. We have a huge amount of content to get through today. This is still a relatively sedate lesson in terms of seeing Millie doing very much. That will change in lesson 3 when we get to Rising Trot. We are going to be installing some extensive wireless networking further down the arena so we can follow Millie as she goes down in Rising Trot and does circles and turns and so on. So there's a couple of things I want to do before we get onto the seat, and that really is to recap on what we were talking about in lesson 1, and also just to answer some of the questions that came up. And I really enjoyed looking through everybody's photographs that we posted on the Facebook group. That was great, and it reminds me of things that I need to talk about too. So a couple of people mentioned that they have uneven weight in their feet. So one of the things you can think about to help you with that is to imagine there is a bar going through the middle of the horse, which your knees are just kind of hooked onto. They're not clamped in, they're just hooked onto it. And you want to think, would that bar be level? So, do you have one knee higher up than the other? Do you have one knee further forward than the other? So just check out whether your knees are actually level. The other exercise you can do, which will help that problem. Oh, and by the way, sometimes the reason you might have more weight in one foot might be that you have a thigh that's kind of very loose on that side of the saddle, and a thigh that's really quite snug on the other side. So there's a little exercise that we can do to show you this, and it's called sort of pommel on the saddle. So what Millie's going to do is going to take her fist and press it in, this fist here, and press it in against the saddle. Now, which thigh can you feel getting snugger there now, Millie? Yeah, so your left thigh. So as you sit in the saddle, take your hand and you put your fist against the pommel and push. And what you'll find as you do that is your left thigh automatically becomes snugger against the saddle. And then you can swap hands over and do the other fist against the pommel, and you'll find this makes the right thigh snug in as well. And that's really good for sort of seeing, which thigh is kind of snugger against the saddle, which one's looser, which one, when you take your fist away, can you manage to keep still snug against the saddle as well. So sometimes it's just because one leg is loose and all the weight is going down into the stirrup rather than being distributed down the thigh. Somebody asked a question about hand width. Now, I hadn't really thought about it before. I just kind of naturally widen my hands when I'm riding a younger horse that is a little bit drunk, and the wider hands do help keep the horse stable. Basically, when you look down from above, as well as there being, if you were looking from the side, can you take up the reins a minute? So when you're looking from the side, there should be a straight line from elbow through wrist down to the mouth. And in the same way, when you look from above, there should be a straight line from elbow through your hand down the rein to the horse's mouth. So if your hands are really close together like this, your arms would come in, and then your reins would go out like that.
Can you repeat how to place your hand on the pommel?
Yes, so that was Joe. So you take your fist and just place it just on this side of the pommel, just on one side. And as you push on one side, you'll feel it make the thigh on the opposite side press in. And what I'll do actually is I'll put up on the Facebook forum a picture of somebody doing that, and the picture's really, really clear so you can see it. We used that in a webinar we did a long while ago, so I'll put that up in the forum for you all. Hello, Tinker. Okay, so back to the hands. Basically, there wants to be that straight line not only from the side, but from above as well. Don't get the hands too close, otherwise your arms come in and then the reins kind of go out like that to the horse's mouth. Somebody suggested the same width as the horse's mouth. Well, probably needs to be a little bit wider than that, but that's probably a good gauge. Lower leg. Okay, so somebody asked about where your lower leg should be in contact with the horse. And this really does depend on the horse, the saddle, your height, the horse's height, and so on. But essentially, when you roll the thigh out of the way here, Millie's calf is against the horse about there. Okay, so she's got contact down to about there. The leg is a little bit away from the horse's side as she gets down towards her ankle and her foot. Now, if she was taller or Tinker was smaller, then there would be less of her calf against the horse's side. So it's really important not to try and get the whole lower leg on, otherwise you simply cause the thigh to move away from the saddle, and you're back in that situation where all of the weight is on your seat bones, and that's the only weight bearing surface, which isn't great for the horse's back. Somebody asked where to measure the angles that I talked about when I talked about the 45-degree angles. So basically I measure it from this angle here. So we take the vertical line and I measure it that way. So the greater the angle, so if it was 50 degrees or something like that up here, that's because Millie's stirrups would be too short. And if she was at 30 degrees or whatever, measured this way, she would be too long. Okay, thank you, Millie. Somebody asked as well how you think about putting the weight into your thigh. One way I can describe it actually is if you take your hand, and hopefully get a friend to do this as well, take your hand and just push up at the rider's knee like this, and get the rider to reach out through the thigh against your hand to resist that. That is kind of reaching down into the thigh, putting weight into the thigh. Okay, so it feels as though the thigh reaches away from you. And we will talk a little bit more about that as well when we talk about the seat. The other issue I've seen with quite a few people is leaning back. So when I was looking at people's pictures, a lot of people were kind of back with the upper body here. So one of the ways that I talk about that is to imagine that there's a vertical perspex piece of glass, or I kind of talk about a wooden plank that is completely vertical. And your aim is to keep your pubic bone, your belly button, your sternum, and your collarbone advanced up to that piece of wood to keep you upright. And this is really good for things like downward transitions as well. Often people get sort of tip forwards or lean back. It's good to ask yourself, do I have all of those 3 points? Forward, vertical, advanced up to the piece of wood, or sort of perspex, clear perspex. So you keep yourself pressed up there. Oh yes, and also we had you can walk on, Millie. So we also had a lot of people with hollow backs as well. I know quite a few people do have back issues anyway, making it really difficult for them to sort the lower back out. I'm going to put some links in the forum to Karen Major's website, who does Feldenkrais work and body work and that sort of thing, and she's got some really useful stuff. And runs courses as well on body awareness and Feldenkrais and so on. So I'll put that up a little bit later. But one thing you can do, and unfortunately I haven't got a chair down here with me, but hopefully if you're sat on your computer you can try this. Just have your feet on the ground and take your hands and just sit on your hands. So have your kind of knuckles facing up, and just have a sit on your hands, and see if you can locate your seat bones. Now that you've got your seat bones located, think of rounding your back and pointing your seat bones really forwards, and kind of notice what happens to your seat bones then. And hopefully you'll find they kind of like possibly disappear and start pointing forwards. And then go for really hollow, as far as you can without hurting your back. And you'll feel the seat bones pull backwards and start to point backwards. And then see if you can find a place where the seat bones point directly down. And that's when you're going to end up being in neutral spine, where the front of your back is the same length as the back of your back as well. Okay. I'm just going to flip the chart over and we'll move on to the next section. That's it for the recap. Okay, so does anyone have any questions from the recap that I can quickly cover?
Yeah, how do you stop your toes pointing out? Is it something to do with leg positioning?
Yes, toes pointing out. That's a really good question. Catherine, thank you very much for that question. That's really good. We're going to wheel Millie straight in here so we can demonstrate this. Okay, hopefully you can see Millie all right in frame. Okay, so if you, one of the exercises I did last lesson, so here's a good toes out that Millie's doing. Should we point you straight to the camera? That might be interesting, mightn't it? Sorry, I'll do it. So. Come on. Is Millie still in shot here?
Yeah.
Yeah? Just okay, so we can see this leg. Hopefully, so can everyone see this leg? Yeah. Okay, so this is toes out. This is kind of like knee away, toes out. The exercise that we did last time was to grab hold of the muscle at the back of the thigh, rotate the thigh round, and have it as flat against the saddle as possible. And then with the thigh snug at the top, you're going to have toes pointed forwards. And much more naturally so as well. You know, if your knee is pointing that direction, it's going to be really hard to turn your toe in any sort of realistic way at all. And it can't be good for the ankle either. The ankle shouldn't be doing any kind of real side-side twisting or anything like that, and that's with the leg straight forward. So you can train your thigh to come out of the way and lie a lot flatter, but you know, you will have to kind of think about doing that, and it's worth again keep thinking of having the thigh reaching away from you as well. Okay, thanks, Manny. Do you want to walk on a little bit?
One more is
One more.
Deb and Kayla want to know about how to stop tipping forward on the seat.
Oh, Deb and Caleb, yeah? Tipping forwards on the seat. Wow, do you know, I had that in my mind before I started all this to cover as well in the recap, so I'm sorry I obviously didn't write that down on my sheet. That's a really good point. And I've seen quite a few riders having problems with that, and especially in rising trot as well. And we will go into it a lot more detail in the rising trot, but I'll give you a little tip that will help you here. The thing to think about is keeping the thighs out in front of you. So the thighs are almost acting like buffers. You want to feel as though you stay back behind your thighs and you keep your thighs out in front of you. Now, the demonstration I did with Millie, where she pushed out against my hand with her thigh, with her knee, almost as if she was trying to get the thigh to come out of the socket, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, is the thigh being as a buffer and out in front. We are going to talk about core strength when we get to the seat section on the seat. When we get to the section on the seat, and you'll actually develop the strength in the torso as well as in the thigh to stop you getting kind of tipped forwards. But generally in rise and trot, what tends to happen is, if for people that tip forwards, is their thigh gets a little bit too vertical and their upper body gets in front of the thigh. Whereas you want to think about having the thigh more horizontal out in front of you, being that buffer with you behind it. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that helps. So, yeah, you're going to have to look at me quite a bit. Millie will wander around in the background, but we really need Millie for a few sort of special bits here and there. Okay, so we're going to bust a few myths. Some are proper myths, really, but we'll see how it goes. The first of all is what I call the seat myth, and the idea that we must use our seat. And generally, when instructors say use your seat, the first thing that I see people doing is starting to shove in the saddle and to make far too much movement. We don't really, in terms of ride with your mind and rider biomechanics and that kind of thing, we don't really teach huge amounts of using the seat to drive the horse forwards. We believe that your leg is what drives the horse forward, and your seat is arranged in such a way that it allows it to happen. If you were to imagine, and I'm sure anyone who's read Basics or has Master Dressage, the second edition, if you imagine you push your seat into the horse's back in an attempt to drive it, you'll find the horse will hollow and probably speed up as well. So you'll get that kind of feeling that the horse is being driven forwards. He hollows his back and kind of moves away from the pressure from the seat. But really that's not the kind of movement that we want the horse to learn when we want it to go forwards. We want it to stay over its back and to thrust from the hind legs rather than lengthen underneath. So the other myth is what I call the relax myth as well. And kind of this is down to core strength. It isn't just being relaxed or being tense. Riding well requires quite a lot of muscle tone from the rider. And good riders, skilled riders, they already have the muscle tone in place, and to them, you ask them, are you tense? And they'll say, no. And you say, are you using muscle tone? And they might go, no. And what they really mean when they say no is, no, there's nothing going on here other than what normally goes on. So to them, their extra muscle tone and stability and everything else is just normal for them. For us to match that kind of tone and stability, we probably feel like we're trying to sweat bullets. And you probably will by the time we get to the end of the session, once I take you through some of the exercises that help develop the tone to stabilize you on the horse. So relax is useful if you can say what it is that you want the rider to relax. A general relax just won't work. The rider will end up being floppy and get moved around. So I think the most controversial myth I'm going to talk about with regards to the seat is what I call the weight aid myth. And we don't really teach weight aids in any sense whatsoever. What we do teach is, for instance, on turns, your seat bones need to be positioned in a certain way, and a certain emphasis on one thigh or the other will cause a weight aid to happen. But we don't actively try and weight any particular seat bone or leg or anything like that on purpose. It's kind of, weight aids happen naturally by thinking about the way that you turn. So let's give you an example of why we don't talk about weight aids, really. So hopefully you're still sat down on your chair and you can feel both seat bones underneath you. Now, let's first of all talk about the idea that I've seen where you push into your stirrups to create a weight aid. So hopefully both feet on the floor. Just try pushing into your right foot and see what happens to your body. Now, with some people, it will lift one seat bone off and cause the other seat bone to go down. For some people, it will cause them to collapse one way or another. But for some people, it will cause one side to lengthen and the other side to stay the same. But lots of contortions can start to happen when you start pushing down into your stirrups, and it will simply lift seat bones off the saddle. Another thing as well is if you deliberately think of pushing on one seat bone or pushing on the other seat bone, you can't help really to start collapsing and contorting your body and shape. So when we get to the lesson on turning, you will actually see how weight aids work, but they're kind of a function of just putting your seat in the correct place rather than any extra weighting of stirrups or seat bones or anything like that. We will move on to core strength. And the first thing you need to learn is bearing down. Now, if anyone has read any of the books, you will have an understanding of what bearing down is. And bearing down is an activation of your abdominal muscles. Some people prefer the term bear out, but it's an activation of your abdominal muscles which will stabilize and protect your back and give you a lot of core strength so that you don't get pulled around by the horse. In actual fact, any of the forces acting on you in the forward back plane, there's a couple of ways you could react. You could tip forwards like this, or you could tip forwards like this. And bearing down gives you a whole load of stability so that you're not kind of doing this and you don't get pulled around and you don't get moved around. This is how you can learn how to do bearing down. Just take the palm of your hand and press it in just underneath your sternum, and just take your other hand and put it on the side of your back. And so nobody can see this, but Tinker is snoozing just out of shot. So I'm hoping when I do this bit that she's going to jump and go, oh, and wake up. So what I want you to do is to just cough. And hopefully if you're pressing in against your middle and sort of clear your throat or cough, you'll feel the muscles in the front of your body and the muscles in the back of your body push out against your hands. Now that is bearing down. That's activating your core muscles. Now I'm doing this right now while talking to you, and it's possible to do, and we will talk about this in the breathing section. You might find this is quite a lot of work, but this is what good riders do to keep themselves stable and stay up with the horse and cope with all those forces that are acting on them. So another way you can do this, there's two other sounds you can make which are more likely to upset Tinker. One sound is psht. So take your two fingers and put them round about kind of bikini line and push in. So this is kind of like the lower abdominal area. You just go psht. As you make the sound psht, you should find it push out in that lower area. And then, same thing, just underneath your sternum, just make the sound psst. So if you make the sound psst, you'll feel that push out against here. So kind of practicing psst and psst will get you stable all the way down and get your bearing down happening all the way down your body. Now, a lot of you will be finding this very hard work. It is very hard work, and it is easier to do once you get on the horse. But this whole activation of your abdominal muscles, combined with correct breathing, will really stabilize your body and stop it getting kind of moved around like this. If you have Ride With Your Mind Essentials, the basics, both of those have really good descriptions in there. And what I'll do as well is I'll paste some of that up onto the forum for you. But having core strength makes a massive difference to your seat and the stability of your seat. And a couple of people that said they get pulled forwards. If you're kind of collapsing here, the bearing down will help stabilize your body and help prevent you being pulled forwards. Because as I said, there's two ways you could get pulled forwards. First one is this, and the second is through the waist. Well, if you're using your thighs as a buffer out in front of you and you're bearing down, you're going to be a very hard place to shift. And this is essentially a martial arts stance. You're bearing down, you're activating your core, you have your knees bent, and you're actually in a really stable place. And this is one of the reasons why I say riders should have their legs underneath them. It puts them in a much more stable position. This is hard work on the thighs, and it's hard work on the tummy muscles as well. What I suggest you do is practice this in the car, practice this while you're standing up and doing the washing up, practice this when you're just walking around. I use walking around a lot to practice things. For instance, I have trouble with my back getting a little bit longer than my front, and I have to think of the entire long back chain of muscles shortening as I'm walking around. So this would be me walking normally, And with my back chain in place, I'm much more upright and correct. So use walking around, that will help get the bearing down working really well. And bearing down makes a phenomenal difference in the way that the horse moves and your control of your body. So, some of you might be turning blue in the face trying to do bearing down. So it's important to be able to breathe whilst you're doing this. So I've been bearing down the entire time that I've been talking to you. And in fact, for public speaking and opera and singing, you have to be able to know how to do this. You have to be able to do diaphragmatic breathing. You have to use the power of your abdominal muscles and your diaphragm to project your voice. So, one of the ways that you can think about breathing is imagine inside your body you have one of those flasks, you know, the sort of chemical flasks that have a long neck and they come out into a sort of bowl shape. So you have the very long neck down here and then comes out into a bowl. What you want to do is, as you're sat there, breathe in now. Start breathing in and see how far down your breath goes. Now, a lot of people, their breath kind of gets stuck about here. Some people get a little bit further down, but very few people are actually able to breathe in all the way down here. So, engage your bearing down, start breathing in, and see which is easier for you. Some people find breathing out while bearing down easier. Some people find breathing in while bearing down easier. But it's important to try and get the thing that you draw the breath all the way down the long neck and into the tummy. Do you have any questions?
Yes, Deborah wants to know if there should be different levels of bearing down.
Yes, you're quite right. Deborah, that is.
Yes,
So Deborah wants to know if there are different levels of bearing down. Definitely. On really, really difficult horses that are trying to pull you around all over the place or speed off or change their tempo, then your bearing down would be very, very strong. I mean, you know, it takes a huge amount of tone to stabilize yourself. If you're pootling around on a pony that has hardly any jump or you know, it isn't affecting you very much, then, you know, you can have a lower level of bearing down. So it really does depend upon the task that's being set to you. You put yourself on an extremely boingy warm blood, and no doubt you will be using a huge amount of bearing down to stabilize yourself and keep your body in place. That's a really good example. Let's look at us trying to do sitting trot on a really bouncy warm blood. One that's active, because apparently they're quite lazy. If you were completely relaxed and you didn't have bearing down, and the only way you could absorb the movement of that horse would be to have the mobility in your spine and hips, can you imagine the huge whiplash that would continuously go up your spine every single stride that horse took? It would do untold amounts of damage. When you engage your abdominal muscles, your core strength, and you bear down, the muscle sheets either side of the spine act like shock absorbers and help dampen the amount of movement going up your spine. You end up sitting stiller, you are less moved around, you know, by the horse, and you're just going to save your back and spine so much agony by being engaged with your core. I hope that kind of makes sense. And I hope that answered that question. But yes, sometimes you're going around and you don't feel like you're doing a great deal of work with your core, and sometimes you're sweating bullets. It really does depend. And also it does depend on your level of tone already and how much you're used to engaging the core. A lot of people don't engage their core at all and will find this really, really hard work. Okay, so we got this idea before of thighs acting like a buffer. One way that you can get a feeling of this is sometimes it won't work because of the size of the horse. Can you say that? Is to get someone to reach around and grab hold. That's so sweet.
Right, let me just stand still.
Okay. Oh, what are you doing? Is to reach underneath and grab hold of the knee either side of the rider and just pull it towards the horse. And hopefully the rider can feel that kind of stretch and that pull, and that's almost the idea of sitting deep, of being pulled deep into the saddle.
Okay, you can walk on. It's finding this a bit strange. The other deal is the thigh kind of feels like it pulls apart as well. So if we took the idea of the thigh reaching away from you to its ultimate, you might end up kind of like this. You know, your thigh out in front of you, your backside kind of merged into the back of your thigh here, and you know, your seat's traveling off in that direction. If you didn't reach through the thighs and you pulled back, you might end up in this situation where you're back with your upper body over the front of your thighs and not able to avoid tipping forwards. So there's this sense of the thigh reaches away from you, but you need to kind of keep pulled back here as well. And that's the thigh acting like a buffer, staying out in front of you with you stacked vertically above it. Mary Wanless has a really good way of describing this, and she says it's kind of like a catapult. Sorry, Millie's. Yes? Sorry? I'm quite far away. Thank you. Millie's just giving me directions from behind the camera there. Thank you, Millie. Walk on. Okay. So, where was I at? Oh, yeah. So Mary's description of this is kind of, she calls it catapulting. And you have to imagine that you have a catapult, and the Y shape, the 2 points at the top of the Y shape, your knees. And then the elastic are your thighs. And then the little pouch at the end that contains the stone, if it were a catapult, are your seat bones. And the idea is to have the thigh kind of stretch like this in both directions. If you were to just go in this direction, we get this kind of thing happening. And if you were to come back in this direction, you have that kind of thing happening with the seat bones coming back. So feeling as though the thigh is a catapult where you're pulling in both directions keeps that thigh acting as a buffer and, you know, really helps you stay stable. The other thing for getting the thigh snug and for bearing down and, you know, having the thigh all the way against the saddle is that you're then responsible. It's really important that the thigh takes the kind of weight of the upper body. So if we imagine this is the thigh and this is the upper body, if you didn't support your own weight through the thigh, all the weight of that upper body would land in the hollow of the horse's back. The thigh kind of acts like a lever, which helps the body stacked above the horse and sitting lightly rather than sitting. I think if anyone watched the video I did just recently, I mentioned a Olympic rider, Baron Hans von Blixen-Finnecker, a Swedish Olympic medalist in dressage and a really influential trainer, wrote some books on his training techniques, and he would always talk about the fight for position. The idea that the horse is always trying to move you around, and you know, when it slows down, you might want to tip forwards. It speeds up, you want to lean back. It turns, you'll go off one side and the other. And to ride well, you have to really be skilled at keeping yourself positioned correctly on the horse. Two other ideas that will help keep you stable. The first one is no matter what you're doing, even when you're turning or going in a straight line, you want to keep your chin directly over the line of the mane. So chin directly over mane. If you're collapsing, your chin will go one way or the other. And the second idea, which you'll have seen in the basics book, is the idea of the torso from here to here, like a box. So if you imagine you had front panels, back panels, side panels. If you are getting put out of shape by the horse or put around, you can ask yourself, which of my panels has lost its shape? So if you're tipping forward, your front panels will have crunched in and your back panels would have bulged out. If you're making a turn and you've collapsed this way, this panel would have collapsed and this would have bulged out. And the correction will be to push out on that side and flatten in on the other side as well. So the box imagery is really good for just kind of making a quick assessment as to whether you're still firm and chin over the mane, and you're still in neutral spine, and you're not collapsed one way or another. The other idea that I think will help, especially those people that might tip forwards, is this idea of trying to be two-dimensional. So a lot of this idea of using the seat is this idea of driving with the seat. And maybe one of the reasons it kind of is talked about is this idea where you feel as though you squash the back of your body up against the front of your body and the front of your body up against your hands. And it might feel as though you're driving forwards there. So if you ask a horse for more energy, you need to feel as though the back of your body goes up to the front of your body, the front of your body goes up towards your hands, and you stay up with that horse. You actually have to provide that kind of tone to stay up with the horse. So in each of the lessons that we're continuing on, we keep coming back to the seat. So we will have to talk about the seat in rising trot, sitting trot, canter, transitions upwards and downwards. I'm just going to go and turn our flipboard over and move on to the next sheet. How are we doing for time? Okay, 2 o'clock. Any questions just from that section? How to what, sorry? Okay. So Julie asked how to stop the lower leg from swinging back. So I'm assuming when you say the lower leg is swinging back, that you're kind of like in this position here. It may just be that your thigh has become too vertical and you're pushing too much weight down into the knee. You know, even if you get the stirrups, the right angle, the 45 degrees, there is still quite a bit of range of the attitude of the thigh, whether you're kind of pointing your knee directly down towards the ground or you're kind of lifting your knee up like this. In your case, you may need to feel as though the thigh is more horizontal and out in front of you for that lower leg to stop doing this. And often actually lower leg too far back often comes with riders tipping forward in front of their thigh. So we're going to talk about how to use the seat bones to control tempo in walk. And yeah, you can have a look around on her. So here's the question. Most of you will have to imagine this. I can't imagine you're watching this on a horse. So imagine my fists are your seat bones, okay? And you're in walk. The question I have, and please feel free to type this into the chat, do both of your seat bones move forward and back like this? Or are you finding one seat bone goes forward, then the other, then the other, and then the other? Answers on a postcard. Well, actually, you could just use the chat. That'll be fine. And let us know. It'd be really interesting. I think actually it would have been great to create a little poll for this, wouldn't it? Get people to click on the poll. So what should be happening is that same feeling you get when you walk downhill on a horse. So a nice big steep hill, you walk down, and no doubt you'll find this happening. As one side of you goes forward, then the other. So that's a really... do you know what? It's a little bit distracting sometimes because I look up there and I see Michael or Carol grinning, and I think they're seeing all those chat messages go by. Okay, so the seat bones will feel as though they kind of move like this independently, as if they're kind of doing a very slight sort of plaiting action as they're walking forwards. Now, some of you, so here's a great exercise you can do since you're all in front of your computer. I very rarely get to do this with people because they're sat on their horse, but I want you to take your fingers and put them either side of your spine, just where the muscle is of the spine. And now you're going to have to get up out of the chair, put down the cups of tea and biscuits, and start walking. And as you walk, I want you to notice what happens to the muscles down your back. And what you should find is, as you put a foot down, one muscle contracts, and as you put the other foot down, the other muscle contracts. This is what's happening when your horse is walking. Well, in fact, in any pace. As they put their foot down, it causes one long back muscle to contract. And that's the reason why the seat bones end up being moved like this, because one side of his back is carrying your seat bone forward and then the other. Okay. One of the things you can, one of the interesting things you can think about next time you're on your horse is, if I were to have pencils on the end of my seat bones, what kind of shape would they draw on paper? You know, does one go forward and the other one hardly do anything? You know, do they kind of go out to the side more? Do they go forward and in? What do your seat bones do? So I'd be interested in hearing about your seat bones in the Facebook forum as well. And hopefully I'll find a picture to put up of what they should look like. Some of you may find this hard to feel. You may be finding it very hard to separate your seat bones out when you're walking. So one of the things that I suggest is, as you're walking around, is to feel what the horse's movement does to your knees. And hopefully you'll be able to feel it's moving it left, and then right, left, right. So if it's moving that, hopefully you can separate out and feel what the horse is doing to either side of your hips. And you can feel one side going forward and then the other side forward. And then since your hips are moving, then you should be able to get that feeling of the seat bones being separate. So what's cool about having the separate seat bones? Well, there's loads of things really cool about once you separate your seat bones out and you can feel them moving like that. You can control tempo. You can know which hind leg is left behind when you come into halt without having to look. And Millie's pretty good at doing that. You can slow the horse down. You can time your walk to canter transitions much more easily because you know where each of the hind legs is. So the typical problem with most people in the walk or in the trot is that they move their seat around too much. The seat bones are moving around too much. So let's get Millie walking on. I'm going to try something I haven't done yet. I'm going to take that camera and I'm going to point it at Millie. And hopefully we'll be able to see Millie moving around too much and Millie sitting still. And we'll also get Millie to really start to slow her seat bones down. And basically the way you slow your seat bones down is the thigh gets a little bit snugger, you increase your bear down, and you're trying to restrict how much movement there is in each seat bone, restrict how much the horse is trying to swing you around. If you remember, I talked about that whole thing that if you were to just allow the horse to move you however you want, he could march off at 100 miles an hour and you just end up having to use the reins. So this skill is really useful in learning how to control tempo. So let's see how this works. You're on a boat now. Okay, here we go. So Millie, what I want you to do with her is too much movement at the moment. Now, Millie's used to sitting really, really still and not really used to doing quite so much movement in the saddle. And this actually is a lot less than I see a lot of people doing. Can you do it more, Millie? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I've even seen that kind of thing. Okay, you can stop now. Right now, I want you to go back to sitting really still. And you're a little bit tipped, Millie. See if you can, that's better. Good. You still tipped, Millie. Shoulders back. Come back. That's it. And this is kind of how still you need to be on your horse. Now, Millie, I want you to start slowing your seat bones down to slow the tempo down. So I want you to sit stiller, control how much swing there is. That's it. And the horse will actually come forwards to a halt. Okay, walk on. And we'll just see that one more time. So Millie's moving a little bit in the saddle, but it isn't very much. And now slow your seat bones down, Millie. Sit stiller, sit stiller, sit stiller, stiller. And we halt. So I'm going to put the camera back up and we're just going to talk about that particular effect and how you can use it when you're riding. That's Mike and Carol. It is rather cold here, actually, but they're all wrapped up. Hello. You can walk on, Lily. Let her walk on. Is that Aaron? Evan. So Evan asked, is remaining balanced on a short-backed horse more of a dynamic process? It's interesting, actually, because I don't remember riding a short-backed horse to be able to say that. I suspect you get a bit more of a kick up the backside from the hind legs. But I would say that balancing yourself on any horse is a dynamic process. And this is one of the reasons why you actually do need a decent amount of muscle tone, why you need a good bear down, why you need to keep matching the forces, feeling as though the back of the body presses up against the front, so that you can keep matching the forces, adjusting yourself. You know, example from our lesson that we're going to have on turning. I can be trotting along and the horse will start to feel as though it bulges like this. Okay, so the horse starts to bulge onto its outside shoulder. And as that happens, I will find my pelvis start to do this, and for me to lengthen down that side as well. And as I start to feel that happen, I've got to stay short on my right side, stop that side lengthening, get my right seat bone back and in, right thigh more on. And I will have to do all of that in the split second that I start to feel the horse fall onto its outside shoulder. So most of our riding is really dynamic. And the more skilled you are, the earlier you feel something about to happen, the smaller corrections you can make. And it is, you know, your position moves through an infinite number of minute adjustments as riding. And, you know, the more rider, the more minute adjustments they need to make, mostly because they're not as easily deformed by the horse. And that's one of the other things about learning to sit still, is that the whole noise to signal ratio. If you're busy moving around and scooping around the saddle and being swayed around one way or the other because you're so relaxed, you'll never really notice the horse making some kind of error until the error is quite gross. The stiller you are, the more you can feel the feedback from the horse, and the quicker you can react to it going wrong as well. The flip side of that is the stiller you are, the clearer the horse can hear your aids. I mean, imagine if your seat is moving around so much that you then want to do something lateral, you want to turn the horse or do some lateral movement. When's the horse going to feel this? And how is it meant to differentiate it above the standard noise of the seat already makes? So sitting still is really important. Anyway, back to the seat bone thing. I want you to, next time you ride your horse, I want you to snug high, get your bearing down, and start to feel how much movement there is in your seat bones. First of all, you can just say, is it millimeters? Is it centimeters? Is it inches? And start to feel what happens if you can start slowing down how much swing there is in each seat bone. Now, you may find your horse slows down. You could be, after all, slowing the tempo of your seat bones down, and you'll have to ask them to walk on. Where does the swing on Jay, and you may have seen me ride Jay in walk, this is how it feels like if I just let go. I'm doing this. I'm going swing, 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 and the whole hip is moving, and the movement is going up the spine and into my shoulders, and it's absolutely all over the place. And to get tempo control back with him, I have to start becoming firmer on the sides here. I have to increase my bearing down. I have to really prevent him from swinging my seat out either side. And once I get control of that and I stop the movement going up my entire body, I get control of the tempo. He starts to round up and pay attention. Getting plugged in, getting that level of control of your seat bones is paramount to learning to lift the horse's back up, to get it to reach into the rein, and getting it moving more over its back. Let's see. I'm just checking my little list down to here. Right. So, and the other thing that you can do as well is see if you can start to slow your seat bones down so much that you can get your horse to halt directly from your seat bones. Now, initially, you may have to make a little bit of support on the rein, but as the horse starts to understand and listen to your seat, and as you get better control of how much the horse moves your body around, you'll start to realize that you can control the horse's footsteps directly from your seat bones and the stability of your upper body. In fact, the feeling you should get when you come into halt is that one seat bone walks forward, the other one walks forward, and your seat stops with a small passive resist through the rein and you bearing down. So that's certainly something to work on at home. You can practice slowing the seat bones down, working out how much the horse moves you around. You know, I didn't realize till relatively sort of recently that when Tinker was pretty young, that she was kind of swinging me out this way. You know, I got a good control on how much forward and back, but the side, she was swinging me out in that direction. So I had to learn to control that as well, and that made a really big difference. Are there any questions about using your seat bones to control the tempo in walk and how the seat bones should be moving in walk? Not really. Right, well, we're just going to flip the chart over. Oh, that's a really glutes. Okay. So I will just flip this chart and then we'll be back. Oops. Yes, I completely agree. So, sorry? Narrowing. So in narrowing, so somebody asked what the concept of narrowing was, and somebody also said, how do you stop your glutes from activating? That is tricky, and it's kind of a muscular action that you kind of need to learn. Mary often calls this popping up. So if you activate your thigh muscles, you could end up, so I'm activating my thigh muscles, but I'm not popping up. Popping up is kind of when you kind of do that, where you whole kind of seat muscles kind of tuck under and your seat bones disappear up inside your backside, and the muscle pad comes all the way underneath your seat bones. You want to be able to apply the thighs without the seat doing that kind of pop up, and it takes a little bit of practice to get it right, learning how to narrow in and not pop up. What was the other question? So we had the glutes and narrowing. So narrowing is actually really talking about narrowing in at the top of the thigh. But and just imagine you were trying to narrow in at the angle here where the outside of the thigh meets the body. What we don't want to do when we are snug with the thigh is have an inversion occur where you're pressing in with the knees and you know the thigh is wider than the knees and your backside is out here somewhere. You narrow in from the top at the most, and you know you're snug all the way down as far as you can. Some saddles won't allow you to get your knee on the saddle at all. You know, you may be snug just down to about here. So narrowness is something that we're going to talk about when we come to the turning section, because that's really important. How narrow you are dictates how good control you have over the shoulders and kind of how quickly you react to the horse falling in or falling out. Imagine you were to have your thighs away from the saddle and really sort of loose. When the horse goes like bleh onto its shoulder, how long does it take you to feel that? And how long does it take to make a correction on that? When you're correctly narrow, you'll feel that there's a very slight push onto the thigh, and you can actually just guard in with a bit with the thigh and the same rein and bring the shoulder back into place. So narrowness is a really important concept and something that Mary discusses, I think, in Ride with Your Mind Essentials really, really well. But for now, we'll sort of say that it is narrowing in here, and having, you know, the thigh be like a corridor down with which you're riding the horse. You know, when you get into the turning lesson, when you have a horse that kind of falls out, you've got to be able to get that thigh on and stop him bulging against that side. So we're going to talk about so our homework. Okay, so what I'll do for that is I will put that up in the Facebook group rather than start stating different muscle groups. And I think I can get permission from Mary to use one of her pictures on there, which actually has all those diagrams in there on the muscle groups that she uses. I'm just going to state what the homework is, and then we'll do some more Q&A. Thank you very much, Millie and Tinker. Bless. You didn't have much to do today, but you'll be very busy when we get to the rising trot lesson. If you fancy taking on a little bit of a trot, that would be really great. And people can see you doing some trot in the background while I jabber on about homework. Okay, thanks everybody who did homework before. Don't worry if you didn't get your homework in. You can still post it on the thread that is already there, and I will look at it. I'm always checking the Facebook and answering any questions that I see on there. So the homework is, I want you to really work on bearing down. I will provide some more material on that and a really in-depth video that we did with Mary on bearing down. So that will help a lot. And there's also a great video on balloon breathing, which will help even further. And you can have a little bit of fun with balloons and developing that ability to breathe while you bear down. We just don't have time to kind of cram all of those things into the session that we have. So bearing down, think about pst and pst as sounds that you can use to access those particular abdominal groups and your diaphragm. Keep working on breathing while you're doing it. Bear down while you stand up, while you go for a walk, while you sit at a desk, sat properly, that is, while you're driving your car. You know, as I mentioned before, I always have to think about my back chain when I walk. Otherwise, I'll do this. This is all the years of me in front of computers like that. The other homework is learning to get plugged in, learning to have neutral spine, be snug through the thighs acting like buffers. You're bearing down and controlling the tempo of the seat bones, controlling how much movement there is in each seat bone as well. And start to note the effect it can have on your horse. If you've got the kind of horse that likes to do Jay's pattern, which is to pedal off like this with the front legs and hollow, you'll find having seat bone control really important. Slowing that horse down and making it think about where it's putting its feet will help prevent that whole chain from happening. Work on what I talked about with the box diagnosis. Think about as you're riding, is my chin over the mane? As I'm bearing down, am I equal both sides, front and back? Are my panels of the box the same? See if you can get to the point where you can then halt with your seat. See if you can get to the point where you can just stop your seat bones from moving and the horse stops. And you might have to come at this from the angle of slowing the walk down, slowing it down, and then coming into halt. But eventually you'll be able, your horse and you will both be used to having seat bone control so that you're walking around and then you both just halt. I would love to see some videos. This is a really difficult concept for people to get right, and some of you may overdo it, some of you may underdo it. Some of you may not be sitting anywhere near still enough. So if you can put some videos together and put them up on the Facebook closed group that I've put together, I'd love to see them. I'm happily going to go through and comment on them in the same way that we've done with the pictures as well. I'd love, if anyone's artistic mind, I'd love to see what sort of shapes that your seat bones make. And finally, I'll say that I'll be putting up some additional resources in that group so you can see Mary describe bearing down in more detail, talk about balloon breathing, and I'll try and remember to get that picture of the muscular groups that are being used as well. And hopefully that will help, especially with the idea of, you know, getting the thighs snug and not popping up. That's actually in Ride With Your Mind Essentials really well as well. So questions so far. Let me just look at Millie here a second. So a bit more forward, Millie. So the name is. So Sabrina, it's a real false thing to think that the horse actually moves that much under the saddle, as in your seat bones have to move that much. Take the saddle off, put your fingers where your seat bones would be, because after all, we're not sitting on the shoulder blades, and walk along with the horse. And what you'll find is there is very little movement going on there. Now, you could end up slowing the tempo down, because that is, after all, the point of, you're trying to slow down the tempo. And yes, a bigger moving horse would have your seat move more naturally. So that's one of the reasons why I was saying, send us a video so we can have a look, because you may end up overdoing it. But the seat does not have to move an awful lot for the horse to have a big stride and over track. It is worse to be very, very sloppy in the seat and just get moved around by the horse wherever it sort of feels like, and not have any kind of tempo control as well. Even in the walk, Tinker, who doesn't have very much of a walk at all, even without a rider on, she's learned to overtrack in the walk and, take a reasonable length of stride for her. So you're tootling, Millie. So can we not tootle? Go a bit more. Sorry about that. Next question. Oh, what length of video? 30 seconds, something like that, 30 seconds to a minute. It's anything longer than that, and I'll probably just end up kind of skipping it. But because what I really want to see is the walk and how you're moving the seat in the walk and how much movement there is. Additionally, that will give me some really good information on whether you're neutral in your spine, and what your leg position is doing and what your thigh is doing. So I won't limit myself to just comments on whether you're sitting still enough at all. A lot of people posted a picture of them in rising trot where they were a bit tipped forward like that, and I know we're going to talk about it in our lesson in rising trot, but if I see the horse and rider in trot going around in a video, I can probably make better diagnosis as well. Any other questions? In walk. So in sitting trot, the movement of the seat bones is slightly different, and the mechanics of sitting still in sitting trot are different. We will cover those in a separate lesson. In fact, Mary's going to be teaching that particular lesson, as she is just far more eloquent than I, and has a really good eye on sitting trot mechanics. So she'll be covering that particular lesson. So the question was, did I want to see the video in walk or sitting trot, but just walk? Oh, okay. So Diane says, any tips for not bouncing around when changing the diagonal in trot? Is that right? So we do our next lesson. Our whole next lesson is all about that. But I will answer your question. Don't worry. It really depends on what you're doing when you sit. A lot of people let go when they sit. They let their weight go. And you're gonna, if you do that, you're gonna have real trouble getting the number of beats right, and you're gonna have real trouble kind of making a smooth transition from one diagonal to the other. When we sit in the sit part of the rise, the thigh still has the weight of our upper body under control. And when you sit, it's almost like if there's an egg there, you want to sit down and go splat and let go and splat the egg. But you want to land on it without breaking it and then go up into your rise. So that when you do the sit, you're still relatively light and haven't surrendered your weight over to the horse. So I hope that makes sense. Actually, it does boil down to a lot of how much tone you have in your thigh and how responsible you are for that weight in your upper body. When one of the courses we'll be doing after this entire series is over will be about on the bit, and that's something that I'll be working with Mary on. And to get a horse to work on the bit and work over its back, the prerequisite is that you're supporting your weight of the upper body in the thigh and not have it go down into the hollow of the horse's back and into the seat bones. So all of the reason why this is called the basics is a lot of this stuff will actually really help you in the more advanced work. Do you have any more questions? Kayla says her hips and knees tighten in sitting trot. So Kayla, I'd probably have to see that to understand what you're saying. There should be tone in the thigh, and there's definitely got to be bearing down in sitting trot. You may mean that you're kind of gripping up. I'd have to see it to kind of, make a diagnosis. Some people do grip up. In fact, actually, if you find yourself gripping up in trot or in canter and the knee coming up and you losing the stirrup, it's actually a imbalance between the tone in the front of the thigh and the tone in the back of the thigh. So in fact, in those situations, I tell people to see if they can shorten the distance between where the back of the thigh inserts into your seat bones and the back of the knee. So you actually end up shortening this muscle and bringing the knee more down and keeping it more down. Riders that are kind of too vertical like this, you'll sometimes have to get them to think of activating the quads and keeping the knee more up. And in fact, I know this is more advanced work, but when you've got a horse that dives onto its forehand, one of the things that happens is it pulls you forward and your thigh goes too vertical. And actually, you need to think about lifting that horse's forehand up through your quads and activating your quad muscles so that they stay out there in front of you, and a little bit of leg and keeping the hand carried, and you can lift the horse up. This, I think, probably we'll actually discuss that in canter, because that happens in canter a lot as well. Did I say what the question was? I think. Oh no, I did repeat the questions. That's fine. So one of the things about not impeding a lazy horse is that you as a rider match the forces generated by the horse, or are prepared to match the forces generated by the horse. So that whole thing of the back of the body pressing up against the front, it's important that you support your body weight through your thighs so that your weight isn't in the horse's back and causing it to kind of hollow and not be able to get the hind legs underneath. Okay, so stupid exercise. Here we go. This is a stupid exercise. It's really fun. You get to see me look stupid. I don't get to see you look stupid because you're all hidden behind your computers, but here we go. I want you to bend forwards like this, hollow your back, loads, and then tuck your head in like this. You're laughing, aren't you? So like this, and then try and walk. And it's really, really difficult to walk forwards. And that's the kind of issue a horse is going to have, where it ends up croup high with its back really hollow. It can't engage its legs. So the other way here is go in the same position, round your back a little bit, drop the head and neck, like I have a huge neck, and then notice how much easier it is to bring the legs underneath. A big deal of how you get energy is how well you sit upon a horse's back. The other side of it is how well does your horse respond to your leg aids? How still do you sit? How much of your body movement and your leg movement is noise when you're trying to get your horse to go forwards? Does your horse know that you're using your leg and it's not just some random noise from you? And the other thing is, how still is your leg when you're generally riding? If you use your leg, it must get a result. It must move forwards quite sort of reactively to your leg. You put it on, something must happen. If it doesn't, and the horse is used to your leg moving around, and he hardly puts any effort in, then you're going to have a lazy horse. So some of it is about sensitization of the horse to the leg, and we will talk about that in upward and downward transitions, because that is a real difficulty for a lot of people having lazy horses. You don't want to be using the stick all the time. You don't want to be nagging them with your leg all the time or shoving with the seat. I mean, sometimes shoving with the seat works because of that whole dynamic, the horse hollowing its back and walking off like that. So that isn't something that we want to teach or encourage, but we will talk about using the stick, using the leg, the responses that you expect from the horse, and we've already talked about, to some extent, the seat of supporting your own body weight and matching the forces. If you do the exercise that we did in that first lesson of putting your fist up against a wall in riding position and pushing, you'd actually have a sense of that bearing down and of pushing the back of your body up against the front, because as you push yourself against the wall, and that's that kind of push that you need. So in fact, sometimes when other instructors might have said push with the seat, maybe that's what they meant. I don't know. It's anything to do with drive with your seat or push with your seat or use the seat, to me, is way too fluffy. It doesn't really describe exactly what it is that you need to do to get the result the trainer is looking for. That question was, if you have a lazy horse, what do you have to do with your seat, or how do you get it to go forwards? I think I repeated it, didn't I? Yeah. Any other questions? No other questions? Awesome. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining. I'm so sorry about that whole mix-up. It was a use of a brand new computer that we just bought. It had worked perfectly before, but this time it didn't like it at all. We switched back to the other. We finally got connected again. This has all been recorded in 4K resolution. I'll be uploading a higher definition version of this at some point and edited down a little bit. Remember to do your homework. That's really important. Let me know how it goes. Send me bits of video. I can give you some feedback on that. It's always very difficult doing this kind of long distance learning, but I am there for you. So do use me as a resource. And thank you very much for sticking with me and joining. Have a good rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much.